Forced law-abiding citizens into curfew as rioters and looters burn and smash. Protesters watch their cause undermined by violent hangers-on.
But I'm literally looking at my neighbors now going, I'm ready to hang them up, gut them and skin them and chop them up. And you know what? I'm ready. My daughters aren't starving to death. I'll eat my neighbors.
Wow. Keep the white name out your fucking mouth.
Thank you for
Good morning.
Good morning, Peter.
Why are you gay?
Who says I'm gay?
You are gay.
Written. Glenn Beck will have his own chapter as possibly the greatest synthesizer of big ideas ever to appear on camera.
There are dozens of videos and photos of Obama having flies land on him indoors at all times of year, and he'll be next to 100 people and no one has flies on him.
Does anyone have a question for Santa Claus?
Santa, do you have to wear a mask?
When I'm in my work shop with all my elves, we all are masked up and social distancing.
The growing calls across the nation to defund the police.
To end policing as we know it.
Off the charts violence in New York City. 11 people shot in just 8 hours on
This is
Sunday.
about the police officers who every single day put on that uniform and they run towards danger when we run away from it.
What's up? Giddy up. Welcome to Failure to Stop. This is the last call episode every Wednesday, live to our YouTube members. It goes out to everybody else on audio on Thursdays. Oftentimes our paid members get to join us earlier in the post to hang out and talk to us. But today there's too much research to be done. And therefore, I didn't get to hang out with our paid members. If you'd like to be a paid member on the YouTube or the Patreon account, it's very easy. Head over to patreon.com /Wolfpack and failure to stop. And you can become a paid member. Just did an incredible interview with a guy who wrote an amazing book called Outside the Wire. It was a fantastic episode. Got a lot more episodes coming up. There's just so many episodes on our Patreon. If you like extra content, this is the #1 show where police meet society and culture. Today's show is brought to you by ghostbed.com /Wolfpack. Today's episode, listen, we do 5 different styles of shows a week, all geared to keeping first responders alert and alive. We start off every Monday with a little comedy because everybody hates Mondays. So we have J. Darrell White, former police officer, now comedian, who breaks down police-related news for us. We have True Crime Tuesdays that keep you awake on night shift with the beautiful and audacious Andrea Uplate. Today's show comes out on Wednesdays. Thursday nights, we have Comm Center with all the horrific 911 audio broken down by dispatchers, dispatcher Jonathan Bates and Drew Breezy. And then we have the Failure Stop Breakdowns, where we have 29-year police detective retiree Drew Breezy breaking down cases with myself. And so we have a little bit of something for everybody. If you don't like one particular show, if you don't like comedy, then don't listen on Mondays. If you don't want to know what's going on in the world, don't listen on Thursdays. If you hate true crime, don't listen on Tuesday nights. We have a little bit of something for everyone. We're probably one of the first real podcast channels where we have a different show for a different demographic, same demographic, first responders, but different styles every week. You can follow us on audio and, of course, YouTube. Today, though, giving you something else to talk about other than dead babies and domestic violence, we have our last call show, which literally gives you information to talk about over the weekend. Because we know that first responders don't watch the news. They don't watch mainstream media. I don't blame you. I wouldn't want to watch mainstream media either. It's all, you have no idea what's real and what's not. But knowing is half the battle, says G.I. Joe. And that's what this show is for, is so that you know a little bit of something so that when it comes up in conversation, you don't have to revert back to one time when I was in police officer camp, back when I was in the Marines, back when I was in the Army. You know, you have something else that you can relate to civilian life. You know, you can turn it off if you want to. Today, we're talking about a fire of lies about the Canadian fire that you just need to know. This Canadian fire thing has gotten way out of control. Conspiracy theories, tactics used by the government to convince you of climate change, which listen, guys, those are all conspiracy theories, whether you're right wing or left wing, you're all kind of guilty of it. By the way, conspiracy theories was a term given by the rights to the left. Now with the tides have changed, the left calls the right conspiracy theories. Well, it's all conspiracies. I don't think the right or the left is right when it comes to the fires. And we're going to go over that. Also, there's a lot of conspiracy around a plane crash that some headlines call a Trump donor died in a plane crash. That's not true. This wasn't a major Trump donor that died in the plane crash. It was his adopted daughter who he adopted at 40 years old. When you talk it like that, it's almost not as exciting and sensationalizing headline. And maybe that's why we're only like probably a blue collar podcast network. That's all why we make maybe thousands of dollars and not tens of thousands of dollars, because we're not sensational. We don't sensationalize the news. We kind of just give it to you in its bare bones. Same way with true crime. We do all of the research, and sometimes the facts just aren't as sensational as you want them to be. But in this case, these are some pretty bold lies being told by everyone. It seems like nobody wants to tell the real story about fires. This is a firefighter's wet dream, by the way. Today's episode goes out to Jay Kiefer, One More and I'm Out of Here podcast, dedicated to you. This is the kind of shit that keeps you up at night. It keeps you hard while sleeping on that ghost bed. This is the story that gets you fired up while staying cool on a ghost bed. By the way, Ghost Bed is offering 35% off across the board right now at ghostbed.com/Wolfpack. But don't you worry, because that 4th of July sale is right around the corner, and they always go big because they're a company of beds that are made in the good old USA, and they take 4th of July very seriously. And they come out with some banging 4th of July sales every single year. So get ready. Listen, if you got PTSD over fireworks, sucks to be you. I got 99 problems, but a firecracker ain't one. I like the sound of freedom, but if you don't, get yourself a ghost bed and a ghost bed pillow. Bury your little ears, your little soft, sensitive ears down into those pillows and just go to sleep. Sleep that night away instead of getting on Facebook and trying to ruin everybody else's good time. Misery loves company, and every year, 4th of July, the booms and the vibrations, they keep me awake. What's sad? Don't ruin it for the rest of it. Suck it up, Buttercup. I get blisters when I do ruck marches, but they don't stop doing ruck marches just because Eric Tansey gets blisters. The road marches continue. The beatings continue until morale improves. So get yourself a ghost bed, sleep it off. Maybe you'll be in a little bit of a better mood, and you won't let your mental health affect the rest of us. I always say that mental health, mental wellness starts with a good night's sleep. And that's why I'm a big advocate and a big promoter of Ghost Bed, because I think everybody's mental well-being will be just a little bit better. I think that PTSD will kind of subside a little bit once you get a good night's sleep. Instead of going after all these prescription pills and sleep tests, why don't you try to get yourself a damn good bed and get a sleep so good that it's freaking scary? Ooh. Ghostbed.com/Wolfpack. By the way, they're huge supporters of veterans and law enforcement officers, and they understand the importance that it is to get us good night's sleep. And that's why they support shows like us and give those massive discounts to people who follow shows like this, because they know how important it is to get a good night's sleep. I don't go anywhere without my Ghost Bed pillow. Also, today's show brought to you by Manscaped.com/Wolfpack. Tax season just ended. I know you guys are getting those tax refunds. Invest it back into yourself. Trim the bush so it doesn't go ablaze. You know, in some of these forest fires, all we got to do is cut back the dead bush, trim the bush back a little bit. Shit won't catch on fire down there. You clean it up a little bit. That way you don't have to burn it down. You know what I'm saying? Go to manscaped.com/Wolfpack. Get 20% off plus free shipping right now. Clean those underbushes, fellas and ladies. I don't know about you. When I'm really in the mood, bush doesn't bother me. But I think my wife knows that I can be in the mood all the time. If she's got if the bush has been cut back a little bit, you know what I'm saying? She gets a little bit more extra. She gets a little bit more extra attention. If the woods aren't so thick, you know what I'm saying? If there's a trail that's been blazed, I'll follow the trail to the promised land.
Magical journey.
There ain't a trail. I might get lost, Josh. I might get lost. Speaking of get lost, I'm lost in your mustache right now. How are you doing today?
It's another beautiful day in paradise. We are steamrolling closer to the existence of this country not being non-existent faster than you and I can come up with it, between all the stuff that's going on with the Bidens, all the stuff that's going on with Trump, all the stuff that's going on with Ukraine. So I would say it's been a nice break to research something that doesn't seem so doom and gloom, but it was kind of a nice break to research something that wasn't like completely 100% big conspiracy.
Right.
Like,
You thought it might be a conspiracy because the headlines had you thinking, oh, great, Trump's being indicted the same week that a big Trump donor goes down in an airplane. Whoa, conspiracy theory. And then you really dive into it, and maybe, just maybe, we'll find out here shortly that this one might not be a conspiracy. Not everything is a conspiracy. I don't discount conspiracies. You know what I mean? Some of them are true, but some of them are not true. And you've got to be able to critically think your way through it so that you're not going crazy. But I want to start off real quick with this fire of lies. This is a Canadian fire. And we started researching this a week ago. And it just got weirder and weirder. And I gave it some time to let things die down because I know that when a fire happens, it takes some time to figure out what the cause of the fire was. They got to wait for that. It takes months to figure out who started that big Canadian fire. And I remember that there was thoughts that maybe a railroad, that a spark from the train started the fire. And then it was a cigarette butt from a truck that may have started it. And then it was lightning. And then it was a power line. And then it ended up being a camper. That lit a fire when they weren't supposed to, and they brought charges on that person as well. So, it took probably all of the summer to come up with that conclusion. So I didn't really want to jump into the Canadian fire thing early because it's just too early to jump into it. But damned if everybody else didn't. If old Trudeau, what do they say? Don't let any good tragedy go to waste. Is that what they say?
Something like that.
And they've been jumping on it more so than recently. We've really seen an uptick, not in fires, but an uptick in people just blowing things way out of proportion. And it's really confusing. It's a really confusing time to be alive. It's a confusing time to be a child. You don't know what gender you are. You don't know if you're gay. You don't know if you like dicks or vaginas. You don't know if you have gay pride or, if you're just disgusted by the whole thing. It's just very confusing times. It's like at one point, I'm pro-gay. I hang out with one of my gay buddies, and I'm like, man, you're a cool guy. And sometimes the gays might get a bad rap. And then I turn on the news and I see them flooding memorials with gay flags instead of American flags and other flags of other nations. And then I'm like, man, fuck this gay shit. It's getting too much. It's getting too much. It's just confusing times that we live in. And that's because mainstream media wants you to be that way. Mainstream media is the enemy. Not white supremacy, not homophobia, not Catholics, not Christians, but mainstream media is to blame because I don't know about you, Josh, but when I go out to the bars and the pubs and I hang out in every city and every town, I'm in a different city in every different town every weekend. I'm in the hotel rooms almost every other weekend. And it just kind of seems like the animosity isn't there in real life. It's only there on the interwebs.
No, because the TVs, like everybody that's these TVs, your stations are coming from New York or Los Angeles. Well, in between New York and Los Angeles is the rest of us.
Yeah.
So all of the rest of us that aren't living in New York and aren't living in Los Angeles, we don't have to deal with that bullshit. So we don't deal with that bullshit. They have to sensationalize it to try to get you to click on it. There was, not to get way off topic, speaking of sensationalizing things and trying to bury a headline, there's a news article out there, you can research it, of Target was suspending things and they had a bunch of bomb threats. And the headline was Target was getting bomb threats. Ooh. Well, you would think that they're getting bomb threats because of all the LGBT stuff and They had their pride stuff out there. And you'd think that the bomb threats, the way that the article was written, the way that the headline was written, you'd think that the bomb threats were coming from people like conservatives or people from the right. They're saying, hey, if you don't take this out, we're going to do whatever. No, actually, it wasn't. It was LGBTQ supporters that were mad that they had pulled the stuff to begin with. So they bury this in the news. Like the facts of the case are there, but you want to align things and arrange things to try to present a narrative. It's bullshit. it's the news media is no longer news media, and we'll kind of get it as we transitioned into stuff. Last night, after they indicted Trump, CNN and MSNBC decided not to carry any of the speech that Trump gave. Now, this is the number one runner for the presidential election for the Republican Party right now. He is a former president. He was just indicted. These are historic things that happened, and the propaganda news, and I'll say propaganda news because it's propaganda news, they decide not to let you hear his voice. They even said that some of the things that he said are what could incite violence and violent rhetoric. Well, okay, what made you, Jake Tapper? What made you CNN? What made you the so much smarter than everybody else in the country? I don't let CNN make up my mind for what is violent or what is not, because on CNN they'll show a fire from a riot and tell you it's a peaceful protest.
Right. I love the inciting riots because we've heard several other politicians that have said some things that are pretty damn insightful. And you're absolutely right. I want to go ahead and start today with this fire of lies, though. I want to take you back. I want to take you back to a time maybe not too long ago in the grand scheme of things, but let me read you a tale. It was pitch black, but there was a yellow glow which seemed to reach to the sky. Balls of fire were falling all around us. The jack pine trees had become ignited and were like big torches. By the time we reached the lake, the heat was terrific. Mother had managed to grab a blanket and a horsehide robe from the tent. These father threw in the water and covered 3 of us with the blanket. Fireballs were falling all around us. Some fell on our blankets, and we had to keep them dipped in the water constantly to prevent it from burning over us. We were all badly burned, especially my father. The horsehide, which he had thrown over my mother and my little sister, had burned to a crisp on my mother's back. Teresa's father died the next day of burns sustained while keeping the blankets wet. The survivors spent 2 miserable nights without food or shelter before help arrived. In all, 11 died. There were 12 survivors. From the worst fire that had ever taken place, one of the top 5 fires in the history of man in the books. This happened in Alberta, Canada. Not last week, not last month, but in May of 1919. The causes of the fire in this article from 1919, Constable Fred Moses recorded that the fire, the ground was drier and the rivers and lakes were lower than they had been in many years. And for his memory, the oldest and the other settlers' memories, very little rain had fallen in northern Saskatchewan until the first week of June. The month of May was a month of extreme heat and high changeable wind. The temperature for days at a time ranged between 70 and 90 degrees. The winds first in one direction and then in another. They almost blew like a hurricane. Near the end of April, a very large number of clearing fires set by settlers were apparently running at will through the district between the settlement and the temperate areas from May 19th to the 28th. They spread north in almost a solid line into the forest reserves, the fire ranging many districts and given the extreme weather. This is all from an article written back from 1919, labeled The Great Fire of 1919. If we fast forward, if we fast forward to the 1990s, a couple hundred years. Yeah. Let's see. When did this fire happen? This is another fire that I read. This was 7 years ago. A perfect storm of fire. The conditions that proceeded to start this fire, seemingly endless supply of dry fuel on the forest floor and in the canopy, the intense heat. You hated to use the cliche. This was a perfect storm. This goes on to say, this article goes on to talk about the temperatures. Let's see. This one happened also near Alberta, Canada. They talk about an abnormally dry April and May. a very early spring led to an early drought, an early summer. This is coming from the 2000s. If you read an article from 1995, that was this article here was, I think, 2014. I have another article up. I don't know if you have these, Dead Leg, but it's from like 1995 or 1993. Again, the same article. Early spring leads to dry fires. And this article is interesting. That was the one that you just had. Go ahead and put that one up there. The one before this one. When you had last, yeah, that one right there. This one says like what caused the Great Alberta Fire. This is one we were just talking about in early 2000s. But again, what does it say? It was a man-made, right?
Yep.
What does that one say? Yep. Man-made. But it all talks about early springs, and I went back and I just started researching these fires, just in great detail. And the funny thing is that the fires weren't really reported on and recorded on until the 1970s. And so all the fire data that you have for every 10 to 20 years is starting from the late 1970s, not even the early 1970s, because that's when satellites could pick up on the fires. And so for them to say that there's a new alarming, that the alarming rates of fires are climbing right now, they're only climbing since the 70s. But if you look back towards the 1900s on the reported fires and how many acres that they burned down, it actually spikes every 20 or 30 years, but still the largest fire being recorded in 1919. There's also another massive one in the 1890s that just burned on forever. We talk about the use of firefighters and technology. None of that technology is typically used in these big fires. They're left to just burn as long as there's not any humans in their path or towns in their path. They just allow these fires to run this course because that's what they've been doing for hundreds and hundreds of years. Matter of fact, I was reading an article from 2001 that talked about that fires have burnt tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of acres every single year in Canada since the Ice Age. So for Trudeau and the climate control crisis people to get on there and say that the climate change and warmer weathers is affecting more and more fires, it's just a bold-faced lie. Also to think that these fires might have been started all at the same time, could have been, but nearly 1/3 of the fires in Canada since the beginning of recorded fires in the 70s have been started by lightning strikes. And they have all been left to just burn at their own demise. Now, and this case with all the smoke that hovers over New York, it just so happened that those winds caught the jet stream at the perfect time, and there were some perfect winds that were moving over at the perfect time, and it left that smoke to kind of loom ominously over New York. But to think that anything nefarious is going on by the governments creating fires to burn down their own things or create a distraction, I think is a little bit of a reach in the whole conspiracy thing. But the funny part is that the media did use a fire that happens all the time, and they did use it as a way to kind of convince you that climate change and get the argument going over climate change. The whole story here is that these traumatic fires that have been killing people have been going on since as early as the Ice Age and since 1919. And if you want to read the article that I just read, it's from a book. And it's a very long article. It's not really a book, but it's an article kind of written in book form. It's about 10 pages long, but it's called The Great Fire of 1919. You can just read that. It's a phenomenal story. Indians were forced to be uprooted. There were hunters that were caught in this fire. People killed, and this fire just rained on and on and on. Again, a firefighter's wet dream. But it is a fire of lies in the media about this fire. Everything from the sped up satellite imagery of the fires appearing to start at the same time. I'll tell you this, it's a 50-50 shot that lightning started these fires. If you read all of the articles in the news right now, almost every single article starts off of, if you type in what caused the Canadian fire in 2023, it'll say half of fires in Canada are started from lightning strikes. More than half of the half the fires in Canada are started by lightning strikes. They never answer the question of what started this fire. And that made me go into question. Why is it that every single article starts off with most fires are started by lightning? Why wouldn't they say that half are started by humans? if half are started by lightning, why did they choose to lead with half are started by lightning instead of starting to lead by half are started by human? By the way, every year it kind of fluctuates between human set fires and man-made set fires. Also, man-made fires are greater in the southern portions than the northern regions, but the northern regions have caught fire and burned tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of acres almost every single year. But the news is the mainstream media has decided to go with the narrative of lightning strikes. And you have to ask yourself why. Why did they choose lightning strikes over man-made in this instance? And then we find this little doozy of an article. Go ahead and put this up. And I love this article, and I know that they are trying to hide it from you. You have to dig way in the depths. This is the Washington Free Beacon Post. But here's the story. Josh Dedlick, would you please read this story? This spawns from the beginning of May when all this fire and mayhem started. And this is what they are trying to cover up by saying half are started by lightning strikes because they do not want you to know this story.
So I seen this when it first came out about a month ago because, like some people were talking in the chats, this only made big news on the East Coast when the smoke hit the East Coast of New York, like we were just saying. Until it hits New York, then it's not a problem. That fire and those smokes was dealing out here in Colorado for like 3 weeks before that. I'm going to get it again today. I just got a notification this morning when I woke up that more smoke from that fire is going to hit us today. So if you're listening to this recently, 2 to 3 weeks from now, you're going to have more of this smoke on the East Coast. So just be forewarned. That's how weather works. But when this came out, I laughed at it and I didn't think it was going to go anywhere. But then the fires kept going and they kept going. So what happened? Female fires taking part in a women and fire training exchange program intended to promote, quote, mental health and gender diversity and inclusion, end quote, accidentally caused an out-of-control forest fire in Banff National Park. Residents in the surrounding areas were evacuated when several buildings were damaged on May 3rd after the female firefighters initiated a prescribed burn that quickly escalated into an uncontrolled blaze. Context. Banff National Park is in Canada, where southern migrants have been fleeing to escape lawless core of American big cities. So they're saying people from the United States are like, we got Mexicans, illegals coming to the United States. We got illegal Americans going to Canada, which I thought was funny. But what they're saying, days before the conference, local news outlets were celebrating the Women's Fire Conference for its efforts to, quote, break down the barriers in a male-dominated industry, end quote. The 12-day training program was described as a, quote, opportunity to engage participants in all different genders, ethnic, and racial backgrounds to explore a growing role of women in fire management. Before I go any further, when I'm underneath of a blanket with 12 other people and we're pouring water on ourselves to make sure that we don't get burned alive, I don't care what the firefighter looks like as long as I get a firefighter. Just letting you know. Jane Park, the female fire management specialist who helped organize the conference, described the group of women who accidentally started the forest fire as, quote, cream of the crop. A former grad school ski bum, Park said the training program was an opportunity for female firefighters to showcase the, quote, value of diversity in order to building allies among men and people who are in the majority. And the way that this is written in this specific article, this is the only one I could find. When it first came out, I found a couple articles written on it. The way it's written now, this is written as if you would use this as a fact-checking thing that you would reference this that would be put on Facebook or Instagram. What happened? What's the context? What people are saying? So even in this, giving the context of a 12-day women's only firefighting thing started a fire that's now out of control. We want to maybe say it's lightning?
Dude, I'm telling you, this is why Last Call is so ingenious, because when you have two non-journalists diving super deep down the interwebs to try to find the truth and try to ignore all the conspiracy theories, we fall into gems like this that make you laugh. You know, I had no idea that there was a Great Fire. One of the world's largest fires, only to be rivaled, maybe still beating a fire that happened in China that now spread into modern day Russia. but one of the biggest fires recorded in the history of man was in Canada, in this same region. And this area of land catches on fire every single year. And some years it's 10,000 acres, and some years it's 100,000 acres. It all depends on the winds. But it seems like since 1919, that sometimes we just have years that are different. And I don't know if it has anything to do with climate change, or that it proves that climate change is a thing, that climate change is caused by, a diesel truck or trains or whatever. But, it's very interesting when you learn things like this. Now, I think it's hilarious that an all-female firefighting ring that's all about inclusivity and LGBTQ stuff starts a fire that got out of control, and they pretty much kept that under wraps. Now, that article came out months ago that he just read. That came out over a month ago, before you guys gave a shit about this fire. So that was before they knew that anybody was going to give a shit. Then all of a sudden the winds shift, and New York, all the holier than now New York, that nothing bad should happen to us. Why do we have orange smoke looming above us? Because that doesn't happen to the rest of the world. It didn't happen in Florida when the ashes were falling from the sky around my house in Florida or in Colorado, because nothing like that could ever happen in New York. But when it happens, everybody thinks it's a big deal. And all of a sudden, we've got to change this narrative, because if they find out that an all-women's LGBTQ fire convention started an out-of-control blaze, we're never going to hear the end of this. And they've done a great job. You haven't heard anybody else report on this. We're the first. If you don't believe us, we'll put the link up. We just read you the link. We just read you the source. And I bet you if you start Googling it, and I thought it was strange, because I was looking at a Wikipedia update, and it had been updated recently. And there was a thing that said that kind of like a warning that, due to unverifiable facts, because of lack of technology, this post has been updated since 2022. And it just all of a sudden goes into climate control and climate effects of lightning, when I was trying to read facts about the fire that happened in 1993. So basically the original fire was started by humans, but now they're going back in 2022, trying to make everything about lightning. And it's just funny how these narratives get painted by mainstream media. So I don't know. I don't believe that it couldn't have been lightning strikes that contributed to these fires, because it looks like that hundreds of fires are started every single year by lightning strikes, and have since the dawn of time. But also hundreds of those fires that are all connected to each other, and they all link up with each other, can be started by humans as well. I think it's funny that when it happens in California, all the news articles talk about how it's man-made fires. Campers start fires. The influx of human beings, the influx of people, the influx of agriculture on economy starts the fires. But when it happens in Canada, all of a sudden it can't be man-made. It has to be lightning. It has to be natural. The reason why they don't want it to be man-made is because the men who made it were actually women, and they were a lot of gay women, and that doesn't look good for them. But accidents happen. Who cares if gay people started a fire?
Here, I'm going to give the LGBTQ community and the female firefighters and anybody that's listening, I'm going to give you what we call a life hack. You know what happens if you fuck up in life? You go, hey, man, I fucked up. Help me not fuck up again, and move on.
Yeah.
That's it.
You know how many old dudes firefighting training have letting fires get out of control? Happens all the time.
All the time.
Happens all the time. You know how many times you go on the training range and somebody sets a fire off on the training range and it burns out of control?
Yep.
Happens all the time.
I've been in plenty of ceasefires for a range fire.
Yeah. But we don't have to lie to the public and go on a whole different narrative just because you don't want to tell people that an all-women's firefighting unit set ablaze that's now putting smoke up. Also, I think there's going to be a lot of implications that they're going to try to come out of this about air quality control, who gets sued, who gets fined. There's going to be a bunch of policies that come out. Almost every time one of these fires come out or something like this makes big mainstream media, they use it as an opportunity to make more policies, which of course just take more freedoms away from you. They'll use this to talk about urban sprawl. I actually saw one article that was about that. It's more people trying to get out of the bigger cities and get into the rural forest that's causing more forest fires. Well, there's not more forest fires. There's not more forest fires. These forest fires happen because it's natural occurrence. Pine makes a certain sap that makes one of the greatest fire starters in the world. Trees fall during big giant storms. They dry, they rot. It makes this fire starter that's amazing. And all it takes is something, cigarette, lightning, something, a piece of friction from a railroad car, whatever, to get just a little ember, and these things can go out of control. It's just a fact of life. It's just nature, just the nature of the beast, man. So I don't know. I don't buy that it was anything crazy. I really do think that, unfortunately, I think it was a mixture. It's a perfect storm, as they call it. Every 10 years, they call it a perfect storm. Cliche, may it not, may it be, but hey, perfect storms do happen. That's why we have a movie called The Fucking Perfect Storm.
And I'm not going to play devil's advocate all the time for this, but if you're on the other side of the fence and you want to play devil's advocate and you're trying to control this narrative, my thought process would be that you go to the why. First thing is you go follow the money. Well, what's money involved in this? There's not necessarily something at the beginning. You don't want to smear this training event. That's what it is. So instead of saying, hey, we doing what I just said, hey, we screwed up at this training event, it got out of control, instead of just falling on the sword, if they fall on the sword, then you could have people on the extreme right go, well, look, every time you have these we tried this, it didn't work. Well, there's times that it does work, and there's times that having females in the fire, like there's progressive change that's not necessarily all negative all the time, and then there's progressive change that isn't in a positive direction. Like some of the worst things in our known history have been started with the greatest intentions.
You're absolutely right. Now, this leads us on to our next conspiracy theory today on Last Call, something that everybody's kind of talking about. I just see the utters of it on TikTok and things like that. And this is a conspiracy theory about the Trump donor who went down in an airplane. But when you really dive deeper into the story, not so much a Trump donor. Also, yeah, it's a lot of money, $250,000. But when we were talking about the whole Epstein thing, and we were talking about Chase Bank, we were talking about what was the one person that was like 2.5 million
millions of dollars.
Millions of dollars that was funneled back to the Biden campaign. I think it was 13 million in one case, in one instance, but from one particular donor, it was 2.5 million. So when you're thinking about these kind of donors that are dropping 2.5 million or funneling a fundraiser for 13 million, one person donating 250,000, yeah, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. But it wasn't this person that donated it. It was an adopted daughter who they adopted at 40 years old. And they died in a plane crash, and they're, you being a plane expert or, a person who knows a lot about airplanes, you're fascinated, you're enthusiast, you're a hobbyist, yep. You like everything, all things planes. You had some really interesting details to point out about this and clear up some of the speculations, which I thought was really cool and interesting. What were some of the things that you noticed about this story that just aren't true or make it not a conspiracy theory?
One, that they're trying to link this with another famous plane crash, and they're trying to say that there was a decompression in the cabin, and that's what caused this to happen. Well, we're going to debunk that real quick. What happens at altitude when you lose cabin pressure? The pressure inside the plane becomes low, so it becomes a cloud. It'll instantly, if it happens fast, it's very like a couple ways that you lose pressurization, like a window flies out, that's really fast. Or if there's a hole that you lose pressure in the pressure system. But it doesn't matter how you lose pressure. If the plane loses pressure, you're at altitude and you've lost pressure, and you're like altitude, you're cold, like negative 20 C, like it's cold up there. So what will happen is the windows will get glazed over with frost. So you can't see in the plane. You can't see in the pilot. You can't see anything. So I think it was Payne Stewart. Correct me if I'm wrong. But there was another big one that it was because of the cabin got depressurized. This one wasn't. There's a lot of things, and I'll explain how we get to that in a minute. One of the big things that came out of this, first of all, was there was the sonic boom that was heard over DC, Virginia, that area. And some people, like kind of significantly far away, were saying that they heard it. Well, air, as you get up in the atmosphere, air is thinner and things move differently at altitude than they do at ground level. So sound is one of those things get travel a little bit easier because the air is thinner. So that's why more people heard it, because when it happened, it was further up in the atmosphere versus being closer to ground level. Not only that, they're reporting that it was intercepted. But it was intercepted by 3 packs of F-16s. There was 3 different packs of 2 flights apiece. So there's 6 different F-16s that went up, and only one of them broke the sound barrier. So this flight took off at 1:13 local time, and they climbed out on their initial track like they're supposed to. So this was the flight track. So they were flying from Virginia to New York. So what shows this little graph here at the bottom is the green line is your altitude, and your yellow line is your speed. But the green line is what you want to look at. Is as it goes up, like there's a little dip right around 20,000 feet. Well, they got an initial climb out and they leveled off, and then they got clearance to go to the next altitude, and then they got clearance to go up to 34,000 feet, and then they asked to come down to 33,000 feet because of another aircraft. They had a TCAS warning, or someone had a TCAS. TCAS is a system in your plane that tells you if there's other planes. It's like a way that planes talk to each other. So they asked for a lower altitude, and then they ended up getting back up to 34,000 feet, and that's when they lost radio communication. So so they wheels up at 1:13. Last radio contact was at 1:28 local time. So a little bit over long. A little bit over 15 minutes. But this is a Cessna CJ. This is a small private jet. It seats, I think, depending on the seating configuration, you can get like 6 to 8 passengers plus the 2 people in the cockpit. It's not a huge plane, but it's not it's not a small plane either, but it's powerful and it's fast. So we can climb and get up to altitude pretty quick. So they had filed to go to 39,000 feet. So what I want you to notice here is when you're looking on the screen is on the bottom of the screen, it says route, and it has a bunch of different weird, crazy letters: PSK, GVE, SIE, Briggs, Q439. What those are VORs. Those are waypoints that are being put into the flight management system of the plane. And each time you see a deviation in the course, so right after you get out of Virginia, or right over Virginia, it diverts to the right. And then when you get over to Maryland, it diverts to the left. And you get a little bit over the Atlantic, it diverts to the left again. And then you get that big U-turn over by New York. Well, there's 2 VOR waypoints that are programmed into this plane when it gets to New York, including the ILS for that runway. So the plane, after 15 minutes, it gets to 34,000 feet. They lose radio contact. They start to get a hold of NORAD. They start to get a hold of other airports trying to make contact with this. The first intercept was, or the first notification to NORAD was at 1:51 Eastern time, local time. So that's when they started getting their shit together to start scrambling the jets and all that stuff. They had scrambled before the sonic boom when DC went off. There was already jets in the air. They were already going up. They were, I think they had said that Dan Greier, A Probable Cause, is one of the channels I referenced for this, and Juan Brown, the Blanco Area channel, is another channel that Dan has a lot of specifics, like way more specifics than I have. So if you want to go back and like get more in depth, he's got a 2-part. He's got a part 1, and then he's got a part 2 where he comes back in and he explains more to it. So what the big hoopla and holler is, you got this plane you've lost contact. You're not talking. The pilot's not talking with them. So you get these fighter jets scrambled to come up. And what they're going to do is they're going to start to try to contact the plane on its frequency. They're going to try to contact the plane on this frequency. It's 121.5. It's a Unicom frequency. It's like the emergence, like if your radio quits working, if you lose track control, if LS fails, default to that. So the fighter jets get up on the air, and you can hear them calling, aircraft squawking 7275, come up on the 122.5 or 121.5. They're trying to make contact with the pilot. It's being reported, and this is through some sources, that the fighter jet pilots they could see the windows. So what that means is there was no depressurization. So the windows weren't frosted over. There was no glaze on the windows. So the cabin, from all intents and purposes, from that view, the cabin was pressurized. All the shades in the back were drawn. So this plane was going from Tennessee to New York. So during this flight, it's not uncommon for people to take a nap. You're on a private jet. Why, this is the time when you're doing your business and stuff. So the lady that was on there,
you don't want anybody to see you in the windows while you're back there becoming part of the Mile High Club. So you shut the shades so the other people can't see. Just kidding.
Throw your cocaine out the window. So it's not uncommon for the shades to be drawn, and then they could see the pilot, and he was quoted as being slumped over. He was in the left seat, slumped over to the right. So when you're in the plane, you've got the left seat and the right seat. The left seat would be the pilot. If you had two people in the cockpit, the left seat would be the person who's ultimately responsible. You change responsibilities during the flight, but that's who's ultimately responsible. There wasn't a second pilot. They get up there. They're trying to intercept this. It's not looking good. So a lot of places are reporting that it made a U-turn and it flew back over. It's kind of true and not. So if you're looking at the picture the graphic I've got up on the screen, and for the people who listen to the podcast, this is just another overlay of the flight track. And it has that 180 to 180 degree turn towards the airport. Well, that 180 degree turn and the heading that it's set up for is for the heading and information for the runway. The only thing is it was at 34,000 feet instead of being down closer to ground level. So when it didn't intercept the runway, it goes into the flight. There's no more program into the computer. So it just goes into flight heading mode, and it'll just stay on the same course and heading and speed that was last programmed in. So if you can see, once it makes that U-turn and it overflies that runway, there's no course deviations. There's no more nothing. It is a straight line straight to the crash. And the fighter jets were with it. It flies for, this is going to be really, really, really hard to read. This is a bunch of numbers. And if you can't read it, don't worry about it. What this basically is the third column from the right is the one that I'm paying attention to. And that's feet. That's the altitude. And that shows that it coincides with the radio traffic and what's been reported from the air traffic controllers about getting the clearances to go to the different altitudes. And at what point did they stopped getting reception from the plane. So the plane keeps flying in this mode until it just runs out of fuel, and the right fuel tanks start running out first. So there's no cross fleet, or there's no cross bleed in the fuel tanks for this plane. A lot of planes have their fuel tanks in their wings, and they'll have tubes and stuff that'll cross bleed so they can balance them out. But this is a smaller plane. The weight and balance on it's still important, but it's an older plane and there's no cross bleed. So the right tanks run out first. So the right engine flames out first. So the left engine keeps power. So it puts it into a right descent and it goes down fast. Once it starts at descent, it's reported somewhere between 20 and 30,000 feet per minute. Dan, I think, is the one that talks about it down to 28,000 feet per minute. That's fast. To give you an idea of how fast you normally descend, so when you're coming out from like a commercial flight, you're going to go somewhere about like 12 to 1,700 feet per minute, not 28,000 feet per minute. So this plane was going down fast. So a lot of speculation. So if there's if you didn't lose cabin pressure, the people in the back would be essentially conscious and awake if they were awake. But if they were asleep, they would know no difference because you're in the back.
Right, like how long was the flight supposed to be versus how long it actually lasted? Like, wouldn't you be like, hey, I mean, like, I know how long a flight lasts. Like, I know I'm supposed to be in the air for 2 hours. So if I've been in the air for 3 hours, I'd be like, yo, what the fuck?
But if you're conscious and awake, but if you're sleeping, this is, so I want to pronounce her name correctly. It's Adina, I believe is how you pronounce it, A-D-I-N-A. And her last name is A-Z-A-R-I-A-N. And I don't want to pronounce it because I don't want to butcher it and do her disservice. She was 49 years old. Her 2.5-year-old daughter was also on the plane. Their nanny, Evadnie Smith was her last name. She was 56 years old. They referred to her as Nanny V. She was also on the plane. The pilot was Jeff Hefner. He was 69 years old. He had worked for the owner of the plane, and I'll get to that with the Trump donor in a second. He worked for him for 5 years, but before that, he worked for Southwest Airline, and he accumulated over 25,000 flight hours. He was married and had 3 kids, started flying early as a crop duster. So this pilot, he's got his shit together is what we're trying to more or less trying to say. So a lot of the speculation of decap or pressurization or other things, it looks to me, my opinion, like some sort of medical event happened and he lost consciousness or something.
There was only
happened.
one pilot. There wasn't 2.
There's only one. A lot of these.
Is that normal?
That's
fairly
have like
a backup.
That's fairly common because it's so expensive.
He probably
for their time
probably had the
hours.
vaccine. Probably had the vaccine stroked out.
Yeah.
So I'm just kidding.
Where a lot of like people are starting to get like the conspiracy is he was a big Trump donor. So he's donated to Trump. He's donated to DeSantis. He's donated to a bunch of Republicans. He's a big 2A guy. He said that when he and his wife leave, they're going to leave everything to the NRA. Like he's not quiet about that, but he's not quiet about it. Like when I search his name under like looking for like the whale donors, because there's websites that have like the whale donors and there's lists and database of this stuff. So when I'm searching his name to try to find who he donated to and how much and when, and it's the only one that I can find that he sent $250,000 at Trump during his 2020 campaign at some point. In a scheme of donors, $250,000 sounds like a lot because that's a house. Or a down payment to a nice house.
2 houses in North Carolina.
2 houses. So like that's half a house in Colorado. But they like it's not a lot of money in the scheme of this guy's.
Let me ask you this though. Let me ask you this. I'm having a heart attack, right? Hey, mayday, mayday, mayday. I'm having a heart attack. You know what I'm saying? I stroke out. Mayday, mayday. You know what I'm saying? Like I feel like you have a radio right there. Like if you're having a heart attack, it doesn't take much to key up and make some kind of a noise and I would just feel like a pilot would have the wherewithal. I mean, there's been some really crazy incidents where people are able to get maydays out pretty fucking quick. Like I find it weird that you would just be like, da, 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 da. You know what I mean?
Because if you have heart attacks, like when heart attacks happen, some of them are instant and they're sudden. There's nothing. You're sure they're done. As soon as it started, it's over. Like you're not bringing them back. You can do CPR. You can bring out the defibrillator. You can be in the hospital when it happens, and it doesn't matter. Like if sometimes when the heart quits, it just quits. Other times it leads on. You'll get that feeling in your hand.
Yeah,
or that
don't you think
what
do you think the odds are? Do you think the odds are that he just had an abrupt sudden heart attack and just fucking died being like completely legit and normal flying his airplane? Or do you think he would have gotten the tingling in the hands? Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Don't you think a pilot would kind of let somebody know like, yo, not feeling so hot right now.
So I didn't go too deep into too crazy deep in his background. I went a little bit into his background, but he was known for being like a safety guy. Like that's what he was known for at Southwest. A lot of pilots, Dan, when he was reporting on it, a lot of people that had reached out to Dan specifically that knew the pilot personally they had nothing but great things to say about him, about his flight experience, about his safety, about how he wouldn't fly in adverse. Like this guy knew what he was doing. So my thought would be is we can try to manipulate narratives and say that it was lightning or he's had a medical event. Something happened and he just was done.
So I guess I don't know a lot about heart attacks and strokes. James Russell says he's had 2 strokes and he didn't know it when they happened. So did you like pass out, James Russell? Did you like go unconscious from these strokes? Were you like in a coma? I'm just trying to, I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I don't know. Greg says some people's pains, discomforts, tolerances are different. That actually is a fear of mine because I can tolerate and brush off a good amount of pain or discomfort. I get it. I guess I've just had so many 911 calls where people called 911 and said I'm having a heart attack or,
well, Keith
Drew Breezy says it can knock you unconscious. People driving cars crash all the time. Yeah, but people driving cars don't have a radio right in front of their face where they can just talk into a radio. It's like if you're in a cop car I don't know, maybe you'd be able to like key up your mic because it's right there. It's not like you're having to get a phone out of your pocket or something. Teresa K says watching someone have an active heart attack is crazy. Yeah, I'm sure it is. But Teresa, maybe you sound like you might be some kind of a nurse if you're watching people have heart attacks often. I mean, do you think it would be reasonable for them to be able to push one button with their thumb in the midst of this and let go of some kind of noise to let other people know that they're in danger? So
I explained what you have in the cockpit for what they could do. The easiest way to send out a message to someone to let them know that there's some sort of emergency going on in the plane is you squawk 7600. So if you change your squawk code to 7600, lets the ATC know. There's different squawk codes to let them know that, hey, there's something going on in the plane. But if you're having a heart attack, you got to think all that blood flow that would be going to your brain is going someplace else. Your body's going through all this stuff. Your brain can't keep up with what's going on. So your fine motor skills, the ability to speak, slurred speech. So like your decision, like even if you were aware of it as it's going on, I don't know that I would go ahead and I would assume and I'd give the benefit of the doubt that someone would lose the ability to control the plane. Because even then, like you're going to turn around to, hey, I'm having a heart attack. And then that's it. Then you've got a nanny that's from Jamaica.
So like my question is like, okay, so he has this heart attack, right? And if it's an abrupt, massive heart attack, I mean, I guess I don't know much about heart attacks. Do they just pass out, slump over, or do they like convulse? Do they like, and like, would they have bumped the controls somehow? Or like, what's the chance that they don't just bury that plane right into the fucking ground? I mean, I don't, I play devil's advocate here. I know that you came in saying that you don't think it's a conspiracy, because you don't think it was the depressurization and blah, blah, blah. But like, we don't see this happen very often. Do we? Do we see people that just go unconscious on airplanes and then the plane just kind of does its own thing? I mean, even like the Malaysia flight, I mean, it buried itself straight towards the ground. Do planes often, people have heart attacks and the plane just flies until it runs out of gas? Is that a thing?
There was within the last year or so, there was a case in Florida. I can pull it up later, where the pilot had a student in the plane, and the instructor had a medical emergency, and the student had to land the plane. And it was quite a few times this has happened, and it's their first time in a plane, first time touching anything.
Yeah.
And the person that was supposed to be teaching them is now killed over with a medical emergency, if not dying, beside him. So they are dealing with all this medical emergency, plus trying to figure out how to fly a plane that you've never flown before. It's a lot.
I mean, maybe they should make it a policy that you have to have fucking 2 pilots so shit like this doesn't happen.
So
you know what I mean?
So this was a non-commercial flight. This is a private jet. So on commercial
and it
flights,
doesn't have a black box because most private jets they're not required.
Yep. This one wasn't the way it was filed. It's not required to carry a black box. They don't know if some do, but they don't, it wasn't required. But for like commercial airlines, because of that, that's what makes plane crashes so crazy for a lot of people, is there's so much redundancy that's built into them. A plane is built to stay in the air. If you got 2 engines, you can fly on one. And even if you don't have any engines, we were just talking beforehand about a YouTuber that got in trouble for crashing his plane. If you're at 34,000 feet and you run out of fuel, if you have positive control of that plane, you can glide for a long time. You've got 30, 40, you've got time to start formulating a plan, trying to work things out. So like it tells me just the way that this kind of plays out. It seems like it's more like a medical event, a quick, sudden medical death.
Yeah, like Greg in the chat says attacks when a person drops immediately is when a main artery bursts. I don't know, Greg. I don't know if he could just be a tactical toilet paper dispenser to the front line of America, specializing in toilet paper plies. But he says, while heavy blockages will leave a person awake and conscious, it makes sense to what he says to me. Someone correct me if he's wrong. But yeah, like a sudden, the chances, the odds of a sudden death like that while flying, It just seems odd to me. I mean, I could see where it leaves room for people to speculate on what happened, or why it happened, or maybe, but I guess shit just does happen. Drew Breezy says they should make the whole plane out of the black box. It's the only thing that makes it. Yeah, right. Like, why isn't the whole plane just a black box so it survives? Joe Russo says, even private jets, these things are highly regulated. I work aerospace. And we heard about this day one. I get it, but I've also just read that they don't believe that this one had a black box. They're hoping it did, but because it's not mandatory for private jets to have a black box, they're unsure if it has one or not, which again just fuels that fire for good conspiracy theories. Greg says, laugh my ass. I said I believe it's a preface for me not really knowing what I'm talking about. Greg, don't worry, dude. I say this shit all the time. I'm not hating on you. I just like to read stuff with context, because you got to remember 99% of our people are listening and they have no idea that I'm addressing chats or who these people are in the chats. So I just don't want anybody to ever accuse us of being like, you said, you claim that this guy on your social media says this, anyway,
I'll tell you, we're gonna get
stuff, huh? We're going to get stuff wrong all the time. And listen, again, this is just talking points for fun, really. But I try to give you talking points so you don't sound like a complete dumbass, that you have arguments. Real quick, we got to dive into a couple other things before we hang up here. We've got the Biden whistleblower. Fill me in on this. You've paid more attention to me. From what I understand is that this FBI whistleblower, they can't protect him. And whatever information that they have, they basically admitted yesterday during the Senate hearing that they can't protect this guy. And the information that he has is so damning that we need to protect him about it. That's basically what I got, even though that Senate hearing was boring as shit and I was doing lots of other things while listening to it. What did you gather from the Senate hearing?
So it's not like that we're not covering this. It's just there's a lot of parts that just kind of have to play out to kind of see what happens with it. So this stems back from, there's a whistleblower that came out sometime in 2020. And alleged that Biden was involved with Burisma and money, something that has been widely reported on and speculated on and all this stuff.
Right, we've known this since the Obama era, that Biden was taking money from not only the Chinese but Ukraine. That story's been told 1,000 times. But now in the Senate hearing, they've got 17 tapes and recordings of these deals. One of them where Biden took $5 million and his son took $5 million, and that's, I know, is the big breaking news, but the FBI won't release those documents to anybody, not Congress, not the House.
Because how it's led up to the last 72 hours or whatever, you've got the House of Representatives Oversight Committee subpoenaed the FBI for this form, this 1023 form. And then for a while, the FBI was stonewalling and saying it didn't exist. And then they said it did exist, but then you couldn't see it. Then they said that you could see it, but under specific stuff, and we have to redact this and that. So then they did get to see it, and they got to receive some redacted stuff. But I guess some people didn't get to see the same versions because some people seen more. And that's what came out yesterday was what was initially put out. They didn't have any of these audio recordings that was on that form. They redacted that stuff. They redacted these audio recordings from the form that they showed the House Oversight Committee. So now they're in with Senate, and Senate's grilling them. And senators are asking the same damn questions that the House did, and they don't have the answers for it. Not only that, we've uncovered that this form that they hid more information after they were told that they have to bring this out. So yesterday in an exchange, one of the senators asked, is this form classified? And the FBI said no. They said, well, why aren't you telling the American public? Well, we told the House Oversight Committee. He's like, well, no, this isn't the House Oversight Committee. This is Senate. He goes, well, we will work with the senators to make sure that you guys see it. Like, well, we represent the American people. So why can the American people not see this unclassified document that for sure has the receipts for the sitting president, then vice president, for taking a bribe for $5 million for him and a $5 million for his son, put his son on this board. So the gist of all of what that's going on and why that is important with the Trump declassified all of the Crossfire investigation. So this is what this investigation was supposed to be doing. This Crossfire investigation was supposed to be investigating this. Trump declassified the information and took it with him. So he took the evidence of the corruption with him. Then the FBI came down to Mar-a-Lago and raided him and took this evidence back. Then they charge him. So you have a former sitting president being charged with issues with classified and documents and all this stuff. Meanwhile, the actual sitting president is using the FBI and its resources to subvert the government, subvert the will of the American people, and undermining the Constitution of the United States by willfully, for whatever reason, just, we're not going to give this information out. We're not going to tell you what's really going on. Not only that, we're not going to investigate stuff that we have the receipts for, but we're going to speculate on stuff and trump up 30-some charges for Trump.
Bizarro times that we live in. It's a clown world. What was the part of the testimony where the Senate says, like, who are you accountable to? If you're not accountable to the Senate and you're not accountable to the House, who are you accountable to? Like, if you're saying that we don't have the authority to tell you to give us this paper, and the House doesn't have the authority to tell you to give us this information, then who are you accountable to? FBI? Like, who is your overseeing boss if we're not?
I don't remember voting on the FBI employment for people in the FBI. I didn't vote anybody into the FBI. I can't vote anybody out of the FBI. But yet the people of the FBI are making decisions to subvert the government. So like
it's wild. It's almost as if the FBI runs the whole damn thing.
Like, we were talking yesterday, and I watched two videos from two separate, completely different sources this morning before we went live, and we started talking this morning. And both of those, independently of themselves, said the same thing I told you yesterday. At what point is the American people going to say, well, we had enough of this bullshit?
At what point is the FBI not going to wish Falconator's daughter a very happy birthday today? I haven't seen the FBI come out one time with a happy birthday to Falconator's daughter. I think it's her daughter.
Yep,
that's her birthday.
little
How old? How old is this kid?
Oh, I didn't get that. I got the name, and I got that it was
What's
today.
the name? What's the birth name?
Little Carrie.
Luke?
No, Carrie.
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 Oh, Carrie. Well, I didn't see the FBI come out with a happy birthday to Carrie, and that disappoints me. That makes me upset. By the way, Falconator has super chatted us in the past. She's also been a paid member, and that's why her daughter gets a very special shout out. So if you guys want special shout outs, I mean, throw us a bone, become a paid member, maybe leave us a super chat or something, and then you can hit me up on the side and tell us that you want a shout out. Greg says, by the way, I know you were joking, Tansey. It's all good. Fuck you, Greg. I'm never joking. Everything I say is a complete serious, and you can go to hell. I'm just kidding, obviously. Luke Perry, Lumber Chef, says, thank you guys all so much for being in the live chats, by the way. Greg, Tactical Dude, Falconator, Bosco Autry, Joseph Russo. Bosco's got a cool little podcast out right now. By the way, if you guys haven't joined the Patreon, I encourage you to do so. That last interview I did with Mr. Ajang Tan from Outside the Wire, counterterrorism detective in Los Angeles and then in Iraq. Phenomenal story. Dad was murdered while he was in the police academy, while his dad was on duty. Just a crazy story this guy has, and it was a fun interview. Check out his book called Outside the Wire. Very cool book. Can't wait for my copy to come in the mail. I've only read parts of this book just in studying it for the show, so I wasn't completely blindsided. Really fun stuff, very Jack Carr in style, but really cool, written by a really cool dude. And so I know that a lot of you guys, when you're in the hospital shifts or, you're sitting in the car while your rookie is typing, you guys like to read books. This might be one to add to your list. It's called Outside the Wire. As for myself and Gia Deadleg, almost called you by your government name. Thank you guys so much, Teresa K, Drew Breezy, all the folks at James Russell for being in the Lumber Chef, for being in the live chats and being paid members. Until next time, guys, guns up and giddy up. See you tomorrow for Com Center.